You've probably seen the term pasture raised on beef, right? It sounds good. It looks like something that you would want to buy. After all, who wouldn't want to enjoy beef that's been raised on open pasture in an environment that's natural to that animal? But here's the truth. What pasture raised actually means might not be what you think. And in some cases, it could be a clever marketing tactic designed to make you pay more without getting any real value. Nearly all cattle are raised on pasture for at least part of their lives, if not for the majority of their life. So why is pasture raised being used as a premium label to make you think you're getting something special? And more importantly, are you paying for a product that's really not any better than conventional beef and may actually just be conventional beef? Let's take a step back and look at the history of the term pasture raised. Originally, it was a term that was used to distinguish different methods of chicken production, so looking at how chickens were raised. It was used to clarify that chickens were raised on pasture versus being raised in confined spaces or in chicken houses. And it gave you as the consumer a clear idea of how that poultry product was being produced. But the real question here that we need to start off with is, well, how does the USDA define pasture raised? And the USDA defines pasture raised as animals that spend a significant amount of their lives on pasture where they can roam freely and eat grasses and other plants. Now, just to speak to the chicken production for a minute, that is not inherent in chicken production. However, this conversation today is about pasture raised beef. And so when you look at an animal that spends a significant amount of time, a significant amount of their lives on pasture, that is inherent in the raising and rearing of cattle. And so we can see that we've got a term that's being applied to cattle right off the bat here, and see that we've got a term that is saying what is already evident. Here's what happened. As the pasture-raised label caught on and became a sought-after term for consumers looking for a higher quality food, the beef industry, they jumped on the bandwagon. They started using pasture-raised as a label for beef, hoping to grab your attention as the consumer, thinking that you'd be willing to pay more for what you thought was a premium product. But here's the catch. Pasture raised in beef doesn't tell you anything about the overall quality of the meat or the finishing phase of the cattle's life, what we generally talk about as grass finishing versus grain finishing. Saying beef is pasture raised gives you no insight into that. And companies hope that you don't become wise to this fact that all cattle are pasture raised. There are some exceptions to that, but those exceptions are very far and few between. They're not by any means the norm. So for the most part, the vast majority of cattle spend the greatest portion of their life on pasture, even if that animal is grain finished. Now, let me show you one example of a company using pasture raised for their beef marketing. And here you can see that we've got Good Ranchers as the example, and right on the About page, you'll see that they've got pasture-raised beef as one of the defining characteristics of their beef. But again, this is not a statement that says anything unique about that animal because all cattle are pasture-raised. Now you may say to yourself, so what? What does that matter? If that animal was even pasture raised for a portion of their life, could they put that on there? Well, they could, but here's why this is misleading for you and why you probably are going to care about this. And it comes down to the fact that you're paying a premium without any additional value there. So here's where it gets really interesting because pasture raised is being marketed as a premium. So when you see that on the label of products, it is there to make you think that you are purchasing a higher level of product. You're often, as a byproduct of that, you're going to have to pay top dollar for that beef. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there are any superior qualities about that beef selection that you've just made compared to what you would define as standard or conventionally raised beef. This term is simply there to make you feel good about what you're buying. It's not giving you the full picture. And one of the things that you as the consumer always want to seek out is transparency. And the term pasture raised on beef gives you no additional insight into transparency. The truth here is that without exactly knowing what conditions the cattle were raised in, you can't be sure about whether or not you're paying for something that is of truly a higher value. And that's where I believe that pasture raised falls short. It leaves you as the consumer feeling that you've gotten a better product when in truth you really haven't. You're probably still looking at a product that is equal to what many of us would consider standard or conventionally raised. Now, have you ever felt confused about this pasture raised label on beef? If you have, tell us about it down in the comments below. I'd like to hear what your experience with this has been. When it comes to buying beef, a better label to look for would be grass-fed or grass-finished, preferably grass-finished here. These labels are going to provide some insight into the entire life of that animal. Grass-fed means that that animal was raised on grass and possibly finished on grass. And I say possibly. Grass-fed is supposed to mean that that animal was consuming grass for the entirety of its life through the early phases of life, the middle phases, what are called the backgrounding stage, and through the finishing phase. But it gets a little vague in some scenarios, and grass-fed doesn't always mean that. Whereas when we see grass finished means that those animals were never sent to a feedlot and they were never going to be finished on grain. They were finished clearly on grass. So at least with these terms, you have some insight into the entirety of the life of that animal, and then in turn, how that animal's finishing process affects the nutrition. When you're looking at grass-fed and grass-finished, there's also some idea about the environment that these animals were raised in, but this is really where you need to have a relationship with a local farmer or rancher so that you can actually ask how they're raising their animals in that finishing process to make sure it's in line with what your expectations are. As an example, at my ranch, our cattle are 100% grass-fed and finished. They never leave our farm, so clearly they never leave our range, so they're never going to a feedlot, and they never have the opportunity to be grain finished. These animals are only grass fed and grass finished. And that means that from the time that they are born until they're ready for processing, these guys are living on open pasture. They're eating grass they were meant to eat. They're not seeing a feedlot. They're raised just the way that nature intended, and I think that's what many of you are looking for as well. Let's revisit that question, why does it matter? And let's start by asking why it matters to the animal. These animals are meant to live on pasture. And if you're going to use the term pasture raised, then it really should acknowledge that the animals have access to real open pasture with the ability to roam and graze and live as natural as they can possibly live to their instincts, and that they have that for the entirety of their life. If you're going to use the term pasture raised, that's what it should mean, but that's not what it means. And here's something else to think about. Does pasture raised mean antibiotic free or hormone free or growth stimulant free? And the answer to that is no, it doesn't. And so those are also likely things that you are interested in and that you want to know about, and that you're going to have to look beyond that pasture raised label and do a little bit of investigation on where you're sourcing your product from. Sure would be a lot easier to have a local farmer ranch that you could send an email or pick up the phone and call and ask that question very straightforward versus trying to navigate a company that is supplying your food and going through the entire chain of production related to the conventional model that is never going to give you any iota of transparency. But here, let's bounce back to you for a minute and let's ask, why does this matter to you as the consumer? And that's because the answer here is that when you buy beef that's actually grass-fed and grass-finished, you're supporting a more humane and sustainable system. Remember, when animals are raised in their optimal environment and they're raised on grass for the entirety of their lifetime, it's not just you and the animal that benefit, it's also the bigger environmental component to this, and that translates right back to you again, because now as the system that animal, as the land that animal is raised on continues to evolve and become more productive over time, that ultimately translates into more nutrition in that beef. And then as you continue to source from that location, you're gaining the benefits of that. You're getting the meat that aligns with your values, meat that's been raised in an environment that's better for the land, the animals, and the people who are out there caring for those animals every day. It all ultimately ends back with you, because you're getting a product that has the highest level of nutrition that you could possibly source. The bottom line is this: when it comes to buying meat, and especially beef as it relates to pasture raised, transparency is key. And while pasture raised sounds nice, it doesn't tell you the full story. It doesn't give you a complete view of many of the questions and insights that you want to have about the product that you're purchasing. And that's why it's so important to ask questions and dig deeper into what you're really getting. Is it truly grass-fed and grass-finished, or is it just a clever marketing term that you see on a product package? I encourage you to seek out ranches that are transparent like ours, where you can see firsthand how animals are raised. Don't let marketing labels fool you into buying a premium product and paying a higher price tag without giving you any additional value. If you're interested in learning more about how to make informed decisions when it comes to buying meat, whether that's beef, turkey, chicken, eggs, all of the mainstays, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, join in on the conversation, and let's continue to explore these topics. The more we talk about this and the more we can create a food system that values transparency, the better that is for everyone. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.